Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. And I'm going to start today by talking about Jeffrey Epstein and his friends, the late Jeffrey Epstein, the man who became mysteriously very wealthy for reasons that remain somewhat mysterious. And I'm going to be talking about his good friend and alleged procurer, or procuress rather, Ghislaine Maxwell. So I thought I would start with a little background here. Ghislaine Maxwell is the daughter of a man called Robert Maxwell, who lived from 1923 to 1991. He was a Czech. His name was Jan Hoch. He anglicized, or he chose an English name when he moved to Britain. And Robert Maxwell was one of the great thieves, one of the great crooks of the 20th century. He was also a Labour MP for 6 years during the 1960s. And he, from modest beginnings, he ended up being, I suppose, the biggest figure in the publishing world in Britain. He owned at various times the Mirror Group, which published the Daily Mirror, Pergamon Press, BPC, or the British Printing Corporation, Macmillan Publishers. And he lived large in every way. He stole hundreds of millions of pounds from pension funds. But because of his wealth and because of his political influence, he was alleged to have been a British secret agent, a double agent, triple agent, an agent of Czechoslovakian intelligence, a KGB agent. People were terrified of criticizing him and his crimes in the media because he was a very litigious man. Maxwell had a very large yacht, which he called the Lady Ghislaine, after his daughter, his favorite child, supposedly. And he fell to his death from this ship, ahead of his creditors, ahead of the law, in 1991. He was alleged to have been a Mossad agent. We don't really know whether this is true or not, but we do know that his funeral was extraordinary. I'm reading here from Wikipedia. Maxwell was accorded a lavish funeral in Israel, attended by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, Israeli President Chaim Herzog, no less than 6 serving and former heads of Israeli intelligence, and many dignitaries and politicians, both government and opposition, and was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. President Herzog delivered the eulogy. The Kaddish was recited by his fellow Holocaust survivor, friend, and longtime attorney, Samuel Pizar. And now, Ghislaine Maxwell, I don't know, what would you say? You'd say that she was a plain-looking woman. What she did for a living is an interesting question. She is usually described as a socialite, which can mean all sorts of things. And she insinuated herself into the coterie of Jeffrey Epstein, who, as I mentioned earlier, became very wealthy indeed through mysterious means, although it is rumored that his close ties to a man called Leslie Wexner, who until recently owned Victoria's Secret, among other things. Supposedly, Wexler served as his rabbi, as they say. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison now. She was arrested in New Hampshire in beginning of this month and charged with enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, was a convicted sex offender, And what is one of the most interesting things about Epstein's case was that the plea bargain that he arranged for his crimes was actually illegal under Florida law. And this plea bargain was arranged by no less than super attorney Alan Dershowitz. I should mention, before I go on to the latest revelations about Ghislaine Maxwell, there are other Maxwells about, and some of the others got into the technology business to the extent that two of his sisters are alleged to be in the blackmail game because of the access to compromising information they control through their technology interests. People have asked the question, how was it that Jeffrey Epstein was able to get along, to get away with his crimes for so long? Why was it that he was welcomed back into the bosom of New York society after he was released from prison? Typically, the standards have dropped, certainly, but typically, a man who has been convicted of sex crimes, including sex crimes against minors, is shunned by high society, but this was not the case with Jeffrey Epstein. He held a lavish dinner to welcome himself back, and many of the top people in New York attended, including George Stephanopoulos, who, of course, is very well politically connected. So, yes, the Maxwell family business, espionage. This is from the last American Vagabond. And it is alleged that Epstein managed to draw so many powerful people into his orbit for protection by blackmailing them. Some people say that this information, blackmail information, was obtained through family connections. Other people mentioned the Mossad. Perhaps we will never know. But we do know a lot more about the charges made against Ghislaine Maxwell, and we do know a lot more, at least in terms of allegations about Jeffrey Epstein's coterie. This is from the London Sun. Former President Bill Clinton once flew to Jeffrey Epstein's orgy island with two young girls, bombshell legal papers claim. The news was revealed after a trove of historic Ghislaine Maxwell court documents were released by a New York court late on Thursday night. In the documents, Epstein victim, Virginia Giuffre, formerly Roberts, says the former U.S. president visited Epstein's infamous private Caribbean island. While being questioned by lawyer Jack Scarola, Giuffre was asked, "Do you have any recollection of Jeffrey Epstein specifically telling you that Bill Clinton owes me favors?" "Yes, I do," she answered. It was a laugh, though. He would laugh it off. "You know, I remember asking Jeffrey, what's Bill Clinton doing here, kind of thing, and he laughed it off and said, well, he owes me favors. He never told you what favors they were. I never knew. I didn't know if he was serious. It was just a joke. He told me a long time ago that everyone owes him favors. They're all in each other's pockets." Of course, another one of Jeffrey Epstein's top friends was Prince Andrew, who is in a infamous photograph, which Ghislaine Maxwell is often cropped out of, with the then Virginia Roberts and Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, the Sun says there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that Clinton, who has reportedly denied even visiting the island, is in any way linked to the underage sex investigation. Scroll up. Also asked Giuffre, were sexual orgies a regular occurrence on the island at Jeffrey's house? And Giuffre responded, yes. The lawyer then asked if she was ever present with Epstein and Clinton on the island of Little St. James. And she replied, Ghislaine, Emmy, another girl who was allegedly a regular at Epstein's house, and there was two young girls that I could identify. I never really knew them well anyways. It was just two girls from New York. The Sun Online has previously reported how legal documents claimed Clinton was seen walking off with a woman on each arm during one stay on the island. Previously released flight logbooks show Clinton is listed as having taken multiple flights on Epstein's so-called Lolita Express private jet. In one flight, Clinton allegedly flew with a woman listed under massages in Epstein's address book. On other flights, additional women who flew with Clinton are either listed only by their first name or simply as female. Clinton also booked Epstein's jet for a 2002 anti-poverty and anti-AIDS tour of actual abuse carried out by the alleged sex trafficker being raided last August by the FBI. It was the tycoon's main residence and was a high-security private oasis, claimed to have a 10-person shower. Yeah, I can't imagine why anyone would want a 10-person shower, but never mind that. Underground structures, massage rooms, false doors, and a mysterious temple. If you've seen pictures of the main Epstein house on Little St. James, it gives off a very strong occult vibe. Clinton's office have admitted that he took 4 trips on Epstein's private plane, as he took 1 to Europe, 1 to Asia, and 2 to Africa. It is also claimed Maxwell acted as a helicopter pilot to Epstein's private island and once flew Clinton to the island. She also revealed that she would be on the shamed financier's plane when sexual encounters occurred. There would be sexual contact, there would be foreplay. There was a bed in there, so we could basically reenact exactly what was happening in the house. It would start off with massaging, or it would start off with foreplay. Sometimes it would lead to, orgies. On July 23rd, U.S. District Judge Loretta Preska ordered the release of large sections of over 80 documents from a 2015 civil defamation suit against Maxwell by Jufra, who accused Epstein of having kept her as a sex slave with Maxwell's assistance. I should mention that there have been lurid rumors about Ghislaine Maxwell and worldwide trafficking that have been circulating for what? More than a decade now? Now I should caution listeners that there are lurid rumors about worldwide sex trafficking that are connected to a great many famous people, most of whom are in the entertainment industry. So, let's see, here's another report from Agence France Presse. You have done nothing wrong, and I would urge you to start acting like it, Epstein wrote on January 25th, 2015, as more allegations of sexual abuse against him surfaced. He wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell. Go outside, held high, not as an escaping convict. Go to parties, deal with it, added Epstein. Maxwell is also accused of participating in the abuse. She faces 6 counts, including perjury, and up to 35 years in prison if convicted. The 58-year-old is in custody in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center awaiting trial. Now, Jeffrey Epstein infamously died in prison, and there are many people who believe that he was murdered. Such is the infamy of Ghislaine Maxwell that no less than the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, has made it clear that on his watch, nothing is going to happen to Ghislaine Maxwell before she goes to trial. In an email on January 24th, 2015, Maxwell appears to try to distance herself from any romantic relationship she had with Epstein. I should mention that Maxwell has been associated romantically with Bill Clinton as well. Epstein, who befriended countless celebrities over the years, including Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. I would appreciate it if Shelley would come out and say it was your girlfriend. I think she was from N99 to 2002, Maxwell wrote to Epstein. It is not clear who Shelley is. In January 2015, Epstein sent Maxwell what appears to be a statement she should use to defend herself. I've been the target of outright lies, innuendo, slander, defamation, and salacious gossip and harassment, it says. In her deposition, Jeffrey describes Epstein and Maxwell as joined hip by hip. Quote, Ghislaine Maxwell brought me into the sex trafficking industry. She's the one who abused me on a regular basis. She's the one that procured me, told me what to do, trained me as a sex slave, abused me physically, abused me mentally, she said. So these revelations, there's an awful lot of them, and I have to say that there's something curious about them, which is that they are heavily redacted. But it appears the redaction was not done properly, so apparently it is rather easy to find that which was allegedly redacted and simply to place it in the parts of the text where there are black lines. Okay, let's see. And we're going to go to the New York Post here. Yes, constant orgies with young girls on Epstein's island. Constant orgies, and once a group of European models was flown in to fulfill their sexual fetishes. Jeffrey testified that Maxwell had continuous sex with girls and women in front of her, some she believed as young as 15. There was just a blur of so many girls, she told Maxwell's attorneys. There were blondes, there were brunettes, there were redheads. They were all beautiful girls. I would say the ages ranged from between 15 and 21. She added she saw Maxwell have sex with women all over the island, by a pool, near the beachfront, in small huts, and in Epstein's cabana. One occasion stands out. She said I think they were models, were flown in. There were orgies held outside by the pool. Girls, she said, spoke in a European language she thought was either Russian or Czechoslovakian. It is common to these claims of worldwide sexual trafficking that a great many, perhaps the majority of these women, come from Eastern Europe or Russia. Now, a Twitter account called Technofog has been following this very closely and has been going through the documents. He says that he's starting with allegations of a minor being trafficked to Maxwell, Prince Andrew, and Alan Dershowitz, as previously alleged. Let's see. The allegations include that Epstein also sexually trafficked then minor Jane Doe, number 3, making her available for sex to politically connected and financially powerful people. The politically connected and financially powerful people identified by Edwards and Cassell by name in the joinder motion as having sexual relations with Jane Doe number 3 were Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, Maxwell, Jean-Luc Brunel, and Alan Dershowitz. Now, apparently there were a number of names which were redacted, which have been, as I say, unredacted. 2 hours ago, the Second Circuit granted a motion by Ghislaine Maxwell to delay the release of her deposition. Men who Ghislaine Maxwell directed Virginia Giuffre to engage in activities with, according to Giuffre's deposition: Dershowitz, Glenn Dubin, Stanley Kaufman, Prince Andrew, Jean-Luc Brunel, Bill Richardson, who was formerly, I believe, governor of New Mexico and was once touted as a presidential candidate, certainly a Veep candidate, and Marvin Minsky, the MIT guru, artificial intelligence pioneer. At the time that Epstein signed his plea deal, the FBI and DOJ knew it had not interviewed all his victims. I should point out that it has been widely rumored and partially confirmed, it would seem, by a prosecutor, that Jeffrey Epstein was an FBI informant, and that is why he got away with such a light sentence when he was convicted. Technofog writes, now let's put things into context. We previously broke what the FBI DOJ in 2008 knew about Epstein. Maine Justice, that is the DC Department of Justice, was helping run the Epstein case and even delayed the grand juries. The DOJ let free Epstein's co-conspirators in the Florida case. This included Maxwell and Sarah Kellen. Here the victim describes the abuse during flights from Epstein, Maxwell, and Kellen. Remember that famous Prince Andrew photo with Ghislaine Maxwell and the victim? The FBI had their own copy for years, even before the victim's 2011 FBI interview. And Technofog claims the FBI knew, they always knew. Now, I have to say that this provides a little more context into the battle between Donald Trump and the FBI. That if it is indeed true that the FBI provided protection, legal and political protection for Jeffrey Epstein, well, and if this comes out, I suppose there will be demands for the FBI to be cleaned out, or perhaps even for the FBI to be shut down and some sort of new alternative to be created. The papers demonstrate that the FBI was in contact with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's minor victim back in 2014, yet they did nothing. Witness interview. Bill Clinton was at Epstein's Island with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and 2 young girls. Allegations against Dershowitz. Not only did Dershowitz abuse the minor, but he helped draft a non-prosecution agreement that gave Dershowitz immunity. Serious allegations. Maxwell directed the minor to have sex with former MIT scientist Marvin Minsky at Epstein's complex in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The trafficking scheme was international in scope. Yes. And Lee Smith asks, why is Susan Rice on the short list of vice presidential candidates? To protect her, as well as Biden and Obama, from Durham investigation into the origins of the discredited Trump-Russia probe. Her fingerprints are all over this scandal. Yes, Susan Rice is as deep state as it gets, but you know, when the deep state is allegedly covering up monstrous sexual crimes, the deep state could be in very serious trouble indeed. Now, I am not going to tell you that everything that has been alleged is true. And I don't know how particularly important it is. It is certainly important that the deal that Alan Dershowitz negotiated for Jeffrey Epstein was, as I say, illegal under a minimal sentencing law in the state of Florida, and yet it went along. And the prosecutor claimed that he had been bullied into agreeing to this by Washington, D.C. That would be the Department of Justice. Yes, this very curious thing. So they screwed up big time on the redactions from the Ghislaine Maxwell release today. You can literally copy and paste the redacted pages into Notepad and read them. Now, so there has been all manner of conspiracy theories floating around about this. I suppose the leading one is that this was done deliberately, such that Ghislaine Maxwell could seek to have charges against her thrown out because any jury would be prejudiced against her because of the botched redactions. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. John Berkshire says Ghislaine thinks Epstein was murdered too. Bob Paxson, yes, okay. Robert Maxwell was Jewish, yes. Well, yeah, I don't know, it just seems to be shameful to me that the state of Israel would have really laid it on so thick for Robert Maxwell, given, as I say, that he was one of the biggest crooks of the 20th century. Now, I don't know what services he provided for Israel, but one might have expected a smaller and more intimate funeral, given what was on the public record about Robert Maxwell. But he was a Czech, says Bob Paxson. Well, yes, Private Eye, which revealed over the years much information about Robert Maxwell. Used to call him the bouncing Czech. John Berkshire again, Epstein was intelligence too, that's why he was untouchable. Well, the evidence would seem to lead to that conclusion. Halper, blackmail makes the world go round. Well, I have to say that is not something that you want the great mass of people to believe, because this leads to an utter collapse of confidence in leadership, which I think we have pretty much reached that state. Debrea says due process is essential for people to actually understand what really happened. Dead men don't talk, right? William Hicks on the 10-person shower. When you're feeling dirty, you take a shower. Yeah. Oh, Matt Forney is in the chat. I should mention that at 5:30, I'm going to discuss a book that his company Terror House published. It's by Ryan Landry. It's called Masculinity Amidst Madness. Oh, this is the famous actor who's mentioned here by Chogokin 666. I don't know about that because this famous actor is said to play for the other team. Is anything new being alleged? Well, yes, there are these lists of names which were among the redacted names, which include a former vice president of the United States. I will just leave it at that. But just to say that there are many more famous names than we have known previously. Look, it's accusations of depravity against the ruling elite have been made, I suppose, from the beginning of time. But that's what they were, for the most part, simply accusations. And I can tell you from my experience as a reporter, I know that accusations of impropriety, typically drunkenness, wife beating, adultery, all manner of sexual misconduct, is typically made against all people in politics, or certainly all prominent people in politics. But this is just gossip for the most part. Here we have this man, Jeffrey Epstein, who actually went to prison and was going to go to prison for much longer a second time, and then he dies in jail. And we have, this Virginia Roberts, or Jeffrey as she's called now, has been making these allegations for a long time, and everything that she has said has checked out. MCT says, I just watched Taxi Driver, how refined society has become. Yes, Epstein revisionism in the chat here, LOL. Oh, this idea that these women are trash. Well, I don't know. They could have been anyone's daughters. Let's see, and I'm not even going to entertain speculation about the sexual maturity of 14 or 15-year-old girls. No, sorry, not going to do it. A curious story from the Hollywood Reporter appearing today by Tatiana Siegel, and it's about Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer has been alleged for years to be a serial pedophile, and his career seems to be over. None of the accusations against him, just as none of the accusations against his pal Kevin Spacey, have been proved in a court of law, but Kevin Spacey's career is defunct as well. And this is an example of a story in where the reporter is clearly hinting far more than she is allowed to write, either by her publication or by their consideration of defamation law. And I suppose besides, I don't know, taking against Bryan Singer because of his personal life, one can take against Bryan Singer because he transformed the film industry into, it's all about spandex films now, as William Friedkin calls them. And Bryan Singer is the man most responsible for this. The director's auteur style changed Hollywood's approach to superhero movies forever, but his on-set tantrums, a cast mutiny, and later allegations of sexual abuse have left a tarnished legacy as the franchise, the X-Men franchise, turns 20. I should mention that I believe it was George Orwell who said that by the age of 50, every man has the face that he deserves. If you look at pictures of Bryan Singer, there is a very strong Dorian Gray feeling about this man. He is difficult to look at because he really appears to have sold his soul to the devil or some such that what he's, I believe, 50 or close to 50 now, and he has this very sinister neoteny about him, where he appears to be, in a certain light, he could pass off being 20 to 25. So the story begins with Michael Jackson, who was accused of being a serial homosexual pedophile, but never convicted. Did you notice a theme here? So he wanted to play a role in this X-Men movie, Professor Xavier. And the producer, Laura Schuler Donner, said to him, "Do you know that Xavier is an older white guy?" And Michael said, "Oh yeah, I can wear makeup." So he prepared a very elaborate screen test by himself, but in the end, the role was given to Patrick Stewart. For fellow X-Men producer Ralph Winter, who met Jackson during the office visit, it was just another day in the Singer vortex in which nothing was predictable. Impulsivity reigned, and there was always an entourage. Oh yes, about the 10-person shower. Singer, and this does not seem to be disputed, would hold parties, huge, huge parties, where there would be hundreds of young men known as twinks. And in a vast swimming pool, there would be hundreds of young men in these swimming pools. And I suppose it's rather like the 10-person shower, although there was no cleansing jets of water from the faucets. I suppose after each party, the pool would have to be drained. Brian always had a lot of friends around, and after a while, you don't pay attention, says Winter. He generally would introduce all of them. "Oh, hey, come over here. I want you to meet Ralph." So it was always very... It has been alleged of Brian, alleged of many men in Hollywood, several of whom are named in this story, that they would receive sexual favors from twinks in exchange for promises about getting them a career in the movie industry. Friends sometimes meant trouble, and with no franchise was that adage more true than X-Men, which transformed Singer, then 34, so if this was 20 years ago, he'd be 54 now, into that rare double threat, an auteur who could make mountains of money for a studio. On the flip side, he began to earn a well-reported reputation for costly absences as he partied with an ever-changing inner circle. As the film turns 20 years old this month, it's impossible to deny its groundbreaking contributions, ushering in the era of comic book-based studio tentpole, spawning 8 films and 5 spin-offs that earned $6 billion worldwide. Yes, in other words, Bryan Singer destroyed Hollywood. How many films are made today that do not already have, that do not exist in some other form? I suppose, when Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a theme park ride, was made into a series of movies, well, that tells you what Hollywood is about today. But no, individual new scripts, new ideas, no, we're not interested in that. It has to be a book. It has to be a remake or a soft reboot, or whatever you want to call it. It has to exist as a comic book or an old TV show. I mean, movies have been made, major movies costing a lot of money, and been remade at Lost in Space, for instance. That was not a very good television show of the 1960s, but it's been playing in reruns for decades, so a lot of people know what it is, so let's make a movie. Oh, yes, and let's get into some pro forma words here. But for some, like GLAAD is the Gay and Lesbians Alliance Against Discrimination, which championed the film for its trailblazing exploration of the mutant experience as an allegory for the gay experience. It's also incomplete to view X-Men and the subsequent franchise without considering the public allegations Singer has faced, namely, multiple minors have accused him of various forms of sexual misdeeds, including rape. Quote, "It's critical when analyzing Bryan Singer's body of work that we center the experiences and trauma faced by his victims and put their continued well-being first," says GLAAD's Matthew Lasky. GLAAD stands for the protection of alphabet people, especially alphabet people youth, and those who would wish to do them harm are no friend of the alphabet people community. Thank you for those pro forma words, Matthew Lasky. And if you look at the people, so many of the people associated with the X-Men universe, they're gay or they're closeted gays, including one of the an English actor who plays a character based on a ferocious animal. That's as far as I'll go. Let's see. It's a weird business, the film business, says Schuler Donner, the producer. We honor creativity and talent, and we forgive the brilliant ones. No, you forgive the ones who make you a lot of money. Unconsciously, we probably do enable them by turning a blind eye to whatever they're doing and taking their product and putting it out to the world. Another exec involved with the film notes his behavior was poor on the movie. We accommodated him on the first movie, and therefore we can accommodate him on the second movie, and on, and it created a monster. Yes, and the movie Apt Pupil is mentioned, and you might want to look into who starred in that movie and what happened to the juvenile lead of that movie. It's very curious that when you look at men who enter the entertainment business in their teens, how very many of them, well, first, how very many of them turn out, strangely enough, to be alphabet people, but how many of them end up drug addicts, drunks, constantly being arrested, dead, typically from suicide. It's very, very curious. It seems this happens so many times that, again, one seems to see a certain trend here. Let's see. Brian would bring people to story meetings who weren't involved in the movies. Young guys, a different person every time. Despite a lineup of A-list writers, David Hayter, who served as Singer's assistant and was answering phones in the production offices for $500 a week, received sole credit. Yeah, it's funny how that happens. In fact, the two major writers walked away from the film and apparently gave up at least $1 million each. Yes, Chris gave up at least $1 million the first year in residuals and credit bonuses. Hayter notes, same with Ed. It's unheard of. Singer spearheaded the film's casting a strange mix of Shakespearean-trained Brits, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is, I suppose, Britain's most famous gay, but I'm sure that's completely accidental. Many of these smaller and extra roles were peppered with handsome young men. At the time, Singer was dating Adam Robitel, who has since become a director of note after helming last year's horror breakout, Escape Room. Singer cast Robitel, then an undergrad at USC, in a cameo role, a move that was common in the 90s but would be frowned upon today. A number of young men, including some who were minors at the time, have claimed in published interviews that Singer dangled X-Men auditions and roles in exchange for sex. One on-set source disputed the idea that the Robitel casting was anything but professional, noting that the two had been dating for 3 years at that point. In hindsight, some Project insiders say one part of casting should have prompted a red flag, at least subsequently, that of Alex Burton, an 18-year-old who played the bit part of Pyro. No one remembers how Burton, who had no previous credits, was cast. One source says Burton told them Mark Collins Rector, and you might want to look this fellow up, and Brian created that role for me. Another source says Burton was flown up to Toronto set from Los Angeles, an unheard of move given the size of his role. Studios typically cast locals for talent with one or no lines. Yes, Mark Collins Rector. This is a man who does have a legal history, actually. And this story does go on. Let's see. The story does go on. It is very long, and we get another pro forma statement from GLAAD. Attorney Daniel Sharon says, why have we accepted that the exploitation of women is outrageous and fair game to confront, but are not willing to when it's gay men exploiting young men or boys. Well, as they say, to ask the question is to answer it. One of the most powerful producers in Hollywood, this was just over a decade ago, he disclosed power. Despite the fact that people in Hollywood were afraid of him and said so, his career pretty much ended after he said this. Now, it has been known that television is dominated by male homosexuals. It's been known for decades, but apparently it is something that is Singer's behavior grew erratic and destructive, culminating in a fight between the director and Disney, leading to a botched stunt that left Hugh Jackman after the death of Vic Morrow and those two that John Landis directed. That this sort of behavior is decided that Will Smith doesn't get a pass anymore because his wife was. Story here from Yahoo. Will and Jada Pinkett Smith run a school that taught Scientology methods to young kids. I don't know exactly what that would end. People should be allowed to do whatever they want, which explains why with him. It's just almost painful. He's simply not churning out the hits anymore. And as you churn out the hit, Bohemian Rhapsody, what do we have in the chat here? With audio quality, it doesn't seem to have done any makes any difference. I want to talk about American politics change. Monger, he has been turned out to be. He's been shown to be prescient, no question. Which he seems to think that perhaps it is all over. And he takes as his starting point the extraordinary appearance of Attorney General Bill Barr before the House this week. And he was not treated with respect, to put it mildly. And let's go to the column here. And for some reason, my computer has gotten very, very slow, even though there's almost no tabs. Anyway, Consular writes, did you happen to view the Attorney General being assailed by lunatics in the House Judiciary Committee Tuesday? It kind of looked like a scene from the French Revolution acted out by a road company touring Alice in Wonderland. Barr stolidly endured their orchestrated calumnies as though he had larger matters on his mind. Do not suppose it will end there or end well for this shabby claque of mutts and harpies. There is the rectified essence of your Democratic Party circa the awful year 2020, spreading its poisons into every organ of society like a fungal overgrowth, making the nation crazy as the old economy of cheeseburgers and happy motoring disintegrates under the spell of a mystifying plague, and the people's zombie indifference turns to epic woe and fury. If the forlorn homunculus Chairman Nadler accomplished anything, it was to ratchet up Barr's determination to round up and indict the figures behind the years-long campaign of sedition waged against the public interest and decency. Sometime before Halloween, an awful wrath is going to befall Barack Obama's wingmen and handmaidens, and it will be a supremely sobering moment. It's the elected Democrats of Oregon, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler and Governor Kate Brown, who have turned the federal courthouse there into a new Alamo by ordering their police to stand down. And isn't it rather strange that they've gotten the New York Times and CNN rooting against the tiny crew of federal officers bravely defending the place? In a sane country, these politicians would be indicted as accessories to riot and insurrection. And the same goes for elected Democrats in Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, Richmond, and other cities where the Antifa freaks are allowed to run wild. Meanwhile, there was an odor of desperation at the funeral for Representative John Lewis in Washington, as Obama inveighed against the use of tear gas on peaceful demonstrators, the big lie of the season. Who has not seen the many videos of these masked freaks launching mortars and smashing things in the streets? Such a naked hustle suggests that the former president is using the mobs to mau the country, while he maneuvers to keep a legion of his former lieutenants out of jail. The screws are turning, as Attorney General Barr's unflappable demeanor implied during the Mad Hatter's Tea Party on Tuesday. The election itself is another front in this undeclared civil war. How exactly did the Democratic Party come to settle on a candidate with no credible capacity to serve as president? Who is Joe Biden fronting for, and who do they think they're fooling? How can he possibly deliver an acceptance speech 3 weeks from now without giving away the game? That will be something to see, but I doubt we will actually see it. If the Dems don't switch him out, there is no way Biden can survive the 3-month homestretch of an election campaign. He can barely make it through a 10-minute appearance in front of 23 hand-picked partisans in a TV studio. Life imitates art, as Oscar Wilde tartly observed. The Manchurian Candidate is truly here. Barr is quite correct when he avers that an election by mail-in ballots is an invitation to fraud. The parallel campaign by the news media to ramp out extra hysteria over the coronavirus is designed to ensure that scam. Keeping kids out of school is another angle on it, to plant a narrative that parents can't possibly leave the house to go to a polling station. Wait for it. The result would be an election that can't even be resolved by the Supreme Court. What will happen then? I'll tell you how it goes. Donald Trump will stand aside and yield to the military, to some general or committee of generals, and the country will be under martial law until the election is sorted out or rerun. And by then, the election may be the least of our problems, with tens of millions out of work, out of business, penniless, homeless, and hungry. That's when they'll truly be selling postcards of the hanging, as the old song goes. Then comes America's Bonaparte moment. Yes, things can get that weird. And the Bonaparte moment, the fabled man on the white horse. Now, I'm just going to refer back again to my political guru, James Burnham, and what he had to say about this in his indispensable book, The Machiavellians. What is Bonapartism? That Bonapartism is a type of democracy very dissimilar to what men in the 19th century ordinarily thought of as democracy. Nevertheless, Bonapartism does not violate the formula of democracy nor the place assigned to suffrage. Rather, can Bonaparte's theory plausibly claim to be the logical as well as the historical culmination of the democratic formula, just as the plebiscite can claim to be the most perfect form of democratic suffrage? The Bonapartist leader can regard himself and be regarded as the quintessential Democrat. His despotism is simply the omnipotent people ruling and disciplining itself. This is just what the Bonapartist leaders themselves and their spokesmen argue. When democracy is defined in terms of self-government, there can be no convincing democratic answer. When we translate formal meanings into real meanings, by the method used in Part 1 to unravel Dante's Politics, the people's century, the century of the common man, become like the people's state and the classless society, variant expressions, the real meaning of which is the century of political Bonapartism, or the Bonapartist state. That it is absolutely clear, watching what is going on in the United States right now, that the system is utterly broken down. What is the very basis of any political system? Well, it is to preserve order. And order has collapsed in the United States of America. Portland is merely one example. Portland-like states exist all over the United States, and authorities, mayors, and governors have said that Antifa and its friends and the performance artists who like to tag along can do what they will, because this is peaceful protest. And yes, there is St. George Floyd to consider. This is what he would have wanted. And this anarchy cannot be allowed to continue for long, for the reason that if all bets are off, if it's a question of force majeure, then power will be decided, political power will be decided in the streets. Right now, it is only one side that is fighting, but when the great mass of the people decide that the government is not going to enforce order, then this creates a vacuum. This creates a vacuum which will be filled by something or other. For all the talk of Trump being a dictator, fascist dictator, Nazi dictator, whatever, he has been remarkably lenient here. Remarkably lenient. How long that will last for, we don't know. But it may be that he will be forced to take action. It's a very interesting, paragraph here where Burnham talks about the concentration of power in the state, economic power, and a partial separation between. Today, the advance of the managerial revolution is everywhere concentrating economic power in the state apparatus, where it tends to unite with control over the other great social forces, the army, education, labor, law, the political bureaucracy, art, and science even. This development, too, tends to destroy the basis for those social oppositions that keep freedom alive. I don't know that James Burnham could have imagined a situation, the woke capital alliance with total government. Of course, a total government which is endorsing anarchy and insurrection in the streets. These are strange times. But here's another paragraph that hints at the way we live now. All social forces are either eliminated or absorbed by the centralized state. Private capitalist property rights and the instruments of production meant, even under trust or monopoly conditions in many branches of industry, a sufficient fragmentation of economic power to provide a basis for freedom. Nevertheless, it does not follow that the elimination of private capitalist property rights must do away with every possible basis for political freedom. Freedom or liberty, in the specific meaning that is being given to these terms, has existed, at least in some degree, along with economic structures which were not capitalist, under slave or feudal structures, for example. Freedom does require that all economic power should not be centralized, but there are other means than capitalist property rights to prevent such centralization. Well, if you have a situation where economic power is increasingly centralized, and if you look at the earnings statements from the big tech companies yesterday, you get an idea of this. If you consider that as the American economy has been wrecked, certain companies such as Amazon and Facebook have made out like bandits. And then one begins to ponder that, perhaps these companies want the hysteria to last forever. They want people to be too terrified or forbidden to leave their homes. This is far better for them because these people can simply stare at screens and order things over Amazon. Which is the perfect world for them. It's not the perfect world for anyone else. These companies have arrogated to themselves control over speech. They've created social media monopolies, which were created on the basis of free speech, and then the old switcheroo was pulled. Oh no, in order to be responsible, we can't give you what we promised to give you. We are, I guess, Facebook, Twitter, etc., Google, they are the real legislators, it would appear, and governments are content to go along with this. Don't forget that for all of their talk of freedom, liberty, even people on the right, politicians of all stripes cannot bear being mocked. And under any condition of free speech, people on the right politicians on the right are going to be mocked. They have liberals, conservatives, labor, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans. Essentially, the truest thing about them is that they are members of the same party, the government party, and they have far more in common than their alleged differences. Dianne Feinstein is in the news again, and she has some very nice things to say about China. She praised, this is from the Daily Caller, she praised China Thursday as a country growing into a respectable nation and cautioned against holding the country accountable for the coronavirus pandemic. Quote, We hold China as a potential trading partner, as a country that has pulled tens of millions of people out of poverty in a short period of time, and as a country growing into a respectable nation amongst other nations. I deeply believe that," unquote, she said during a Senate Judiciary Committee meeting Thursday. The California senator added that stripping China of the country's foreign sovereign immunity would be a huge mistake, noting that if China is held accountable for the spread of the coronavirus, the United States may also be held accountable. And then the Daily Caller goes into at great length Chinese human rights violations. I don't know that there's much that we can do about that, but I am more interested in Senator Feinstein's business arrangements. She and her husband are quite wealthy, such that she goes back and forth from her San Francisco home to Washington, D.C. in her own Gulfstream. That's quite wealthy when you own your own Gulfstream. Let's see. This is from the National Republican Trust. Senator Feinstein herself has a long sordid history in dealings with the Communist government of the People's Republic of China, and that's not even getting to the fact that she had a Chinese communist spy on her staff for 20 years. Yes, this was until 2013 when the FBI informed her of the presence of this person. The spy was listed as office director of her California office and had been her driver for several years, and according to news reports, was reporting to the Chinese Ministry of State Security at the San Francisco consulate. Feinstein sought to downplay the FBI's discovery of the Chinese agent, saying that of information that may or may not have been true, but either way, having a foreign agent on her staff at any level represents a dramatic compromise of national security. During the 20-year span that Feinstein had the agent on her staff covered the period in which she was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It also apparently covered in the mid to late 1990s when Feinstein took actions that crippled production of lanthanides, a substance critical to America's national security, while China was trying to take over the market. A November 2018 report from a private intelligence firm, Defense One, revealed more details of a familiar theme, that China is attempting to halt U.S. production of critical rare earth metals called lanthanides. These lanthanides are used to produce what the U.S. Department of Defense calls exotic materials, which are used in the production of America's most advanced weapons systems. For well over 2 decades, China has sought to control the world's market for rare earths and lanthanides, and by the late 1990s, China accomplished that military objective with the help of Feinstein and then President Bill Clinton. In 1994, Feinstein was the driving force behind the California Desert Protection Act, which protected an unremarkable desert area surrounding the U.S.'s only rare earth mine. There was nothing to protect, no particular species of anything unique, but it did put the mine operations in a precarious situation. Mountain Pass Mine, as it is known, was then owned by a company called Molycorp. Feinstein's California Desert Protection Act effectively gave the Department of the Interior home field advantage when dealing with the mine, since Molycorp's wastewater pipeline passes through a small portion of the newly protected Mojave Desert before reaching its destination in an evaporation pool owned by the mine. By all accounts, Molycorp was a good steward and had a good environmental record. In summer of 1996, a wastewater pipe burst during routine maintenance while being flushed with fresh water. Thousands of gallons of water spilled into the government-protected land where the parched ground absorbed it a short distance from where it should have drained and evaporated into the desert air. The company immediately reported the spill, and a month later, a coalition of armed government agents, including representatives from the Bureau of Land Management, arrived at Molycorp's gate. They had guns out. Molycorp had already begun, even though there was no hand, began a process that would ultimately prevent the mine from producing any more rare earths or lanthanides. That forced the U.S. Department of Defense into the extraordinary position of having to import critical materials for high-tech weapons from communist China. And the last time I checked, China controls something like 93 to 95% of rare earth production on Earth. About that time, a communist Chinese state-owned company, Baotu Rare Earths, opened an office in San Francisco. Its representative, Weiji Q, told investigators at the time that he believed Molycorp would go out of business, and Baotu was preparing to take over the world's lanthanide market, and it did. At that time, the Molycorp-owned Mountain Pass mine provided nearly all of U.S. rare earths and approximately 80% of the world's supply. In a short time, China became the world's leader in rare earths. Also at that time, national security experts warned that it was dangerous for the government to put Mountain Pass mine out of business, predicted that once China had cornered the market, they would not sell rare earths to the U.S. That prediction has come to pass this year. Senator Feinstein has had a long relationship with the People's Republic of China, going back when she was in Mexico, which has troubled many in the U.S. intelligence community. And when she was mayor of San Francisco, she formed a sister city relationship with the mayor of Shanghai, Jiang Zemin, in the early 1980s. This fellow rose to become General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, President of the People's Republic of China from 1993 to 2003. And the period in which China's military gained access to America's most important weapons technology. Feinstein and her husband, Mr. Blue, have fared very well financially as a result of this relationship with China. But considering Feinstein's powerful position in the Senate, those concerns have never been fully investigated. Years cultivated warm relations with Feinstein. Feinstein has uniformed handsomely during Feinstein's career from the greatly expanded China trade she supported. She has served as a key intermediary between China and the U.S. government. And she's still around. And this is actually, it's an outrageous situation. But she's a very soon, so we shouldn't trouble her final days with this. Of course, people have been saying that breaking news from Bloomberg: Trump plans to sign an operation. TikTok is it's an app which is made to use to make simple videos. It's also a Chinese surveillance device. Matt Stoller comments, "It turns out the way to protect ourselves from Chinese tech isn't by having our own monopolies, but to use the law." Final story about political corruption is also from the Daily Caller. More than $600,000 in the first week of July, FEC records show. Omar's campaign has now paid E Street Group, the consulting firm run by Omar's husband, Tim Minette, more than $1.7 million since August 2018. The query can come despite an ongoing FEC complaint against Omar's campaign. So I guess Dianne Feinstein, she can't be brought down because she's too powerful, and Ilhan Omar can't be brought down because she's an immigrant, because she's a Somali, because she's, well, allegedly a Muslim. Her marital history would not seem to support that. This is alleged of this woman, and there appears to be evidence that she married her brother in order to become a citizen of the United States. How about that? Huh? So let me just check and see whether things are as bad as they were. Because people, what I've been hearing this week is that it got better as the show got longer. I was hoping that would be the case for today. Walrus Libertarian says Omar also supports trans, not very Muslim. No? In Iran, the problem of male homosexuality is dealt with by the mullahs by telling these men that they are actually women, and to get the op, which will be supported by the mullahs and which will be paid for by the government. Halper says, picture KMG streaming public with scores of non-English speaking Chinese immigrants filing past. Not so many here as in Vancouver, but a great many more than when I moved here 19 years ago. Battery Day is September 22nd. I don't know what Battery Day is. Senator Feinstein also got the letter from Dr. Ford, if memory serves. Yes, Yes, that is true. And sat on it for weeks while building a little conspiracy, one might say, against the nominee, Kavanaugh. Amazon should split. It's getting ridiculous, says Alex Delarge. Isn't there a 4-for-1 Apple split announced today? Yeah, 4-for-1. Yes. Trump has been remarkably weak. We shall see. You know, he who laughs last, as they say. Now, if Trump is reelected, he's not going to have to worry about reelection 4 years hence. It works differently in the parliamentary system. Anything that's controversial is done right at the beginning, you know, because an election, then you appear moderate in the run-up to the election, and then you can do more of what you want after you've been elected. Alex Large says conservatives are too stupid to leverage teachers refusing to teach. Well, we've not quite yet got to that point. And again, we can see. I do use a desktop. I don't use a laptop. This should be a stronger computer. There seems to be a access for a direct connection here. There's a little box on top of the desk. So maybe I can buy a cable. No, I can't buy a cable because I believe I went through I don't believe that my new computer has the input jack on the back. It just assumes that I'm going to use Wi-Fi. Yes, I have checked that. Yes, it just assumes that everyone uses Wi-Fi and no one uses a direct connection anymore. Oh, Trump may seem weak, nowhere as weak as Boris Johnson. I know that some people on the right like Boris. I don't like him. He's a clown. He was a rather engaging clown, I suppose, back when he was a editor of The Spectator, when he was a columnist, when he appeared on the panel shows in Britain. But nothing in his life has ever suggested that he was fit to lead. Toby Young writes in Lockdown Skeptics, I didn't think the government's management of the pandemic could get any worse, but I was wrong. The measures announced last night imposing new restrictions in Greater Manchester, East Lancashire, and parts of West Yorkshire are a new low. They were announced by Matt Hancock in a Twitter thread at 9:16 p.m. No, I'm not making that up. He really did announce restrictions affecting millions of people on Twitter less than 3 hours before they were due to come into force. Or should Oh, and the government then further guidance this morning. People from other households in there are allowed to mix with a person or persons in another household if a single adult household, i.e. people who live alone, or single parents with dependent children aged under 18. Clear? When asked about this rather complicated rule on Breakfast TV this morning, Hancock only added to the confusion. The law that we're bringing in is that two households cannot meet in the area defined, but obviously any two households that are meeting should follow the social distancing. In the area defined, he muddied the waters. An affected area, unless they're attending a wedding or a funeral, in which case, affected area if you're holidaying there. There's more of this gobbledygook. People in centers, leisure and entertainment venues and visitor attractions, but only if they remain with members of their households while support. Hancock said this decision was based on the data and referred to an increasing rate of transmission in parts of northern England, the main swab in recent weeks. Unfortunately, the ONS hasn't disclosed whether it retested anyone to ensure the first test result wasn't a false positive. From 0.0, the overall number of cases is far lower than it was at the end of April. Graphs, because it goes like this, but it doesn't seem key, in which he announced that he was going to. And on July 17th, Boris felt plans to further ease lockdown rules on August 1st to reopen most remaining leisure centers, including bowling, reopen all close contact services, including any treatments on the face, such as eyebrow threading or makeup application, allow wedding night. Prime Minister saying at a Downing Street press conference that we should now squeeze that brake pedal to keep the virus under control. Again, no evidence was presented to show the virus isn't under control. On the continent since its peak in early April. Yes, it's fallen off a cliff, as it were. COVID, at the very least, has decided to treat pneumonia patients as COVID patients in the numbers. Oh, yes, and why must this be? A reader sent me this extraordinary comment made by Professor Robert West from University College London, a member of the behavioral science group that feeds into SAGE, which is the group of experts which has engineered this disaster in England. Professor Robert West from University College London, yes, of Neil Ferguson infamy, said that the level of concern people feel about the virus was easing and was even lower among young people. He said this level of concern was the key thing, which encouraged people to take the necessary action to protect their community. Quote, we need to ramp that back up to appropriate levels, unquote. Janice Street Porter, who's been around forever, you can see her in the movie Blow Up, in the famous nightclub scene where the Yardbirds are playing. She is doing her 60s thing. I'm going to be talking about Blow Up on theater Thursday in a couple of weeks. She asks in the mail, when did the policy of flattening the curve so the NHS would not be overwhelmed turn into ruining our lives and wrecking the economy so nobody catches COVID ever? Well, Boris Johnson, it seems to me, has painted himself into a corner. I think that he believes that if he keeps the panic alive indefinitely, if he keeps people locked down indefinitely, then everyone will forget that he is responsible for this. Perhaps if it's made permanent, then no one will point fingers at him and tell him that he's obviously unfit for purpose and should leave before he's dragged out because, oh, the lockdown is permanent. There's always been a lockdown. Has there not always been a lockdown? I mean, I suppose it's now fading from memory in some parts of the world, the pre-lockdown world. Dr. Fauci is in the news again, and apparently he is backing this preposterous notion that, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that because of COVID. Mass protests, A-OK. Yes. How about that? And he said that the COVID pandemic will continue for some time in latest disagreement with Trump, who said it would disappear. I don't know, continue for some time, that could mean anything. It could mean everyone dying, or it could mean a few people getting it who don't have it, and them not showing much or anything in the way of symptoms. The very fact of an existence of a virus does not create a crisis, but Fauci and these other experts have managed to persuade a great many people that it should. William Briggs looks at this panic from a slightly different view today. Perhaps the worst thing the church did in response to corona doom was to issue, in the true spirit of synodality, a new viral translation of the Bible. These modified verses will take some getting used to. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, except coronavirus, but that goes without saying. Psalm 23. Those that truly love Christ, his gospel, and his people, they are not afraid of men. The spirit of power, love, and of sound mind is opposite to a spirit of fear, unless they are living in a typical pandemic. Then safety first. John 4:18. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, Matthew 1:20. Maybe I copied these down wrong, but in the age of pandemic, untimely meditations on life's rebirth. The lessons of fragility, finitude, and vulnerability bring us to the threshold of a new vision. They foster an ethos of life that calls for the engagement of intelligence and the courage of moral conversion. To learn a lesson is to become humble. It means to change, searching for resources of meaning hitherto untapped, perhaps disavowed. To learn a lesson is to become mindful once more of the goodness of life that offers itself to us, releasing an energy that runs even deeper than the unavoidable experience of loss that need to be elaborated and integrated into the meaning of our existence. Can this occasion be the promise of a new beginning for the humanitatis, the promise of life's rebirth? Perhaps often that the Vatican should spend a little more time reading the Gospels. The reason that people are still interested in what Jesus had to say 2,000 years ago was that he had interesting thoughts which were presented in a forceful manner. But no, one wants to be vague these days. One part that is understandable, and it's a word salad, is this. The pandemic, however, forces us to look at a number of additional factors, all of which involve a multifaceted ethical challenge. In this context, decisions must be proportionate to the risks according to the precaution. Why the economy of the world must be wrecked because of global warming, because the worst might happen. Yeah, the worst might happen. The precautionary principle is it's madness. It's the precautionary principle. They would never let their children out. Even before COVID. They would have a bicycle helmet on all the time, and they would be attired like the Michelin Man. So if they fell over, they would just bounce off the sidewalk or whatever. They would not be allowed to get close to any other children because those children are covered with germs, and many of them have viruses, etc., etc. Briggs comments, it's understandable because it's wrong. The precautionary principle is the absolute worst consequences. This is a logical truth. The PP would have you protect against every potential worst case and impossibility. In reality, then, the PP is always used as a weapon to justify panicking about whatever thing its holder wants to panic about. What strikes the average Friday fish eater is how quickly and even eagerly our spiritual leaders embraced Corona doom restrictions. They didn't protest when the government said to shut down public masses, even though they could have. Our dear prelates and priests could have said, no way, we're stopping the worship of God. Come get us if you have to, but we're doing it. They likely would have won that fight. But with practiced somber faces, they instead came to the microphone and said, you can't even go to the funeral of your own mother, safety first. Cardinal Dolan, on June 12th, sent an email sympathizing with those cut off from the Eucharist. Your patience and understanding throughout this difficult period have been admirable. I've been moved by the many letters, phone calls, and emails sent to me expressing your longing to be able to attend Mass and receive the Eucharist, telling me of your admiration for your parish priest, or offering your support for your parish and the Archdiocese as we deal with the financial implications of the corona's financial implications. How about spiritual implications? Even though our churches were temporarily closed for public Mass, our priests and parishes found new and innovative ways to reach out to people. The consummate bureaucrat was so moved, he did nothing. Safety first. Oh, maybe I exaggerate a trifle. He did throw his considerable and increasing weight behind our land's latest cause. Quote, the rallying cry of Black Lives Matter has echoed throughout the land as indeed it should, wept Cardinal Dolan. The reality is that the sin and evil of racism continues to haunt our society, and sadly, it too often appears that for some, Black lives don't matter or don't matter enough. It's been a long time since I heard any priest from the pulpit talk about sin. In fact, I can't remember any homilies talking about sin, actually. I suppose there's only one sin left. Well, I mean, there's various ecological sins. Not taking swift enough action about climate change. But certainly racism has vaulted to the top of the 7 deadly sins. I suppose there's only, 2 or 3, let's say 3 deadly sins. There's racism, there's climate change inaction or denial, and then there is looking at the past, you know, attachment to the past, particularly the past of the Catholic Church, what its rituals used to be and still are. I mean, the Tridentine Mass can be made available by bishops. That was Pope Benedict's doing, but most of the bishops decide that they are not going to make the Mass of Pope St. Pius V available, even though people want it, because they're afraid that it will become too popular. So a quick look at the chat before I go to the book club. William Hicks says, they're showing Captain Blood, 1935, on movies. Olivia de Havilland was gorgeous 20 years ago. What a smile. She was a very attractive woman, no question. Donald Robertson says, when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, he wasn't referring to every foreign jackass that might pass through Galilee. Jesus was a Jewish supremacist, says Donald Robertson. Well, that's obviously not true. That's obviously not true. Was that a joke? Donald Robertson, does Kevin reuse clips from previous streams? No, I do not. I have mentioned James Burnham and Bonapartism where appropriate. Antonioni on Theater Thursday. Halper. Yes, indeed. The aforesaid blow up. Yeah, Edward Bond, the scandalous English playwright, was responsible for much of the dialogue of that movie because Antonioni's English was not very good. Walrus Libertarian said virus is gone and restrictions are worse than ever. That's really the point of this. Here on Vancouver Island, 10-15% of people wear masks. Again, mostly old or Oriental and or both. There's vibrancy, Victoria vibrancy in the background there. Some places are still doing this maximum number of people in the store nonsense. I went to London Drugs for something, but the other day, and there were like 8 people in line, and no, I'm not going to do this. I'll come back later, or I'm not going to go to London Drugs today. It's just so stupid. I've been pointing this out since March. If you're going to allow people into a store, they are going to be getting in close contact with each other, despite these stupid arrows that they put in lines, because people have to get, they get to the end of the aisle, and then there's people going across them, and it can't be avoided. Debrea says, is KMG going to move elsewhere during the weekend? Not this weekend. I've got this hotel room until the 11 a.m. on next Friday, and the decision is going to have to be made in the next few days about what's happening. There were various things that had to be done that I had to do, and I couldn't have pulled it off this Friday. Yeah. Let's go to the book club. Our book today is called Masculinity Amidst Madness, and it is by Ryan Landry. And it is published by Terror House. And I understand it has become something of a surprise bestseller. I should declare a personal interest. I know Ryan Landry, or I used to know him slightly. I interviewed him on my old podcast. We exchanged emails, perhaps some direct messages, back when he was active in, what would you call that, the Twitter wars of 2016 to 2017. And then, he had Son of Brocklanders, SOBL 28 Sherman. He had a website, he used to write essays. And then he withdrew from that a couple of years ago, which I gather coincided with his move to Middle America. He is now the head of a new website, which is called The American Sun, which I have quoted on this live stream. And there are many interesting things at theamericansun.com, and I commend it to you. So, masculinity amidst a madness. this presupposes that there is a war on masculinity. I think it's fairly obvious that there's a war on masculinity. I mean, okay, I'll give you one example off the top. Whenever you hear people railing against the bad old days, as they supposedly were, they will bring up a few television sitcoms. It's just to indicate just how risible the bad old days were. And one of these sitcoms is typically a show called Leave It to Beaver, which I believe ran from, I think, 1957 to 1963. And this was a sitcom about a mother and father and their two children, Wally and the Beeve. Theodore was his actual name, and Wally was a couple of years older than Beaver. And it's not the kind of sitcom where there's a lot of yaks in it. It's very observational. And it was planned that way deliberately by its creators. And the focus is just their everyday lives. And they are not their age. And this is shown very gently, quite often. They have a stay-at-home mother. And their father, Ward, played by Hugh Beaumont. And Hugh Beaumont is quiet, reserved, modest man, but he is obviously forceful and authoritative. And we see this. He's not cruel or loud or ranting. He just wants to do the right thing by way of his children, of instilling ethical and moral precepts in them, putting them along the right path. Oh, his wife, who I mentioned stays at home, is best described. She's an attractive woman. She's best described as motherly, and she is well dressed in the home, and she is always shown wearing a skirt, a long skirt. And the home, the Cleaver home, is, how would you say, pleasant and well ordered. There's no question that this Ward's wife may have some disagreements with him, but he has the final say. And apparently, this is a horrific situation that we've seen the back of this, and thank goodness that we've seen the back of it. It's odd to me, that feminists and those who hate the traditional family would point to this show in particular, Leave It to Beaver, because whenever I see it, I just think how very pleasant it is. Obviously, it's idealized. All of these shows, like Father Knows Best and the Donna Reed Show, are idealized versions of a reality. But that's the point about them, that they are idealized. That I suppose that there were few American households that were as well ordered as the Cleavers, but that was the ideal. The ideal that we're presented on television now in the movies is very, very different than that. In fact, order itself would seem to be a bad thing. For decades on television, men, particularly married men, fathers, have been shown to be idiots. They have been shown to be stupid, bumbling, constantly humiliated by their wives and humiliated by their children, no less, and often in public. And they deserve it because married men with children are apparently the worst men on earth. Now, of course, exceptions are given for black parents, but not for white parents. Let's see. And Ryan Landry gives a list of examples in which men are attacked on all sides. What would you call such a man that strove to fulfill these instructions? Look at what they call your brothers. The man who works out, he is an overcompensating narcissist. A gray-haired man in a sports car, he's a nervous man with a midlife crisis. An unmarried man at 35, he is a boy afraid of commitment. A man who won't date single moms, he's a guy who won't man up. A man committed and dedicated to his work, putting in long hours, a workaholic. A man who plays video games after college, a man-child, a Peter Pan. If he dates younger women, an immature creep. Enjoys a drink during the week, a drunk. A man who gives a woman unwanted attention, creep. If he does so at work, he's now unemployed. Won't pay for a date, he's a broke cheapskate. A father present when his daughter has a sleepover, he's a potential molester. Prefers thin, feminine women, he's brainwashed. A man has a deep, meaningful friendship with a fellow man, he's a closet case. If he wants his wife to stay home and raise their children, he's an oppressive patriarch. If a man values chastity, he is a slut-shaming oppressor. If a man likes the look of 18-year-old women, he's a borderline pedophile. If a man treats a woman like a lady, he is the pal a woman never dates. A man who doesn't keep up with the latest fads, he is an out-of-touch goof. If a man fights for custody of his kids, he is a second-class citizen. If a man wants to remove his genitals and wear a wig, he is courageous and beautiful. These are the labels created by a sick society that has lost touch with the essence of man. These are the labels of the deviant side of the spiritual war that smears any attempt to embrace the masculine traits that create order and civilization. This society glorifies vice and eschews virtue. What legitimacy do the labels of an inverted society have? And again, this use of the word inverted or inversion, again, it's rather similar to what I was talking about earlier this week, the moral inversion that Michael Polanyi talked about. I suppose if this book had a theme, you could take it from a line by David Mamet, what one man can do, another man can. Or a little more to the point, what men of the past have done, today's men can do. Because essentially, the continuity in male behavior has been disrupted or even broken. And this is the result of interventions over decades by experts, the rise of feminism, and the increasing importance of mass and latterly social media. One of the things that Ryan Landry does point to many, many times in this book is the importance of historical consciousness. And our elite does not want men or women to have historical consciousness. Because, if a thing is from the past, well, then it is obviously risible, as in my example of the sitcom Leave It to Beaver. There is only the present and the future. There is never any being. There is always becoming. And I'm going to go through this chapter by chapter. One of the criticisms I have of this book is that it would have greatly benefited by chapter headings. And my other criticism of this book, which is minor, which later chapters are better on this, it would have been quite useful if, alongside the precepts that Ryan Landry gives us, there were examples illustrating this, taken from history, say, much as Machiavelli does in The Prince. But as I say, in later chapters, we get more illustrative examples than in the beginning. Chapter 1 is about the importance of goals, about the importance of true growth, and contrasting true growth to what we see today, which is just the pursuit of conspicuous consumption. That apparently it is the purpose of man to consume. That is what we are here for. And Landry in chapter 1 talks about the importance of resistance. That one cannot be given everything on a plate because growth is not possible under those conditions, that one needs resistance. And Ryan Landry talks about his belief in actual physical resistance, such as, sleeping instead of on a soft mattress, on a hard floor, learning, look to the past again. The bedroom arrangements are pretty modern in history. Men used to live under what we'd call Spartan conditions, and there wasn't a lot of complaining. There also we weren't inundated with overweight, morbidly obese men, and I suppose we didn't have all these people complaining about back pain and all the rest of it. I suppose one of the reasons that people weren't complaining about back pain so much is because it was not good to be a complainer in the old days. That was not manly. In chapter 2, he talks about intelligence, and he sees key to humility being key to intelligence. That Socrates famously said that the true philosopher is the man who knows that he knows nothing. And he talks about men being reduced to a weekend role, and he mentions how it is necessary for us to emulate those who have come before us. Again, this war on historical consciousness is we see this with the tearing down of statues, including tearing down of statues of people who were supposedly on the right side of history, because we are at war with the past. Because society which knows nothing of the past is a society that is crippled. We are dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, but this idea insults us, because apparently everything that is around us, it was created ex nihilo just a few years ago. Now, he talks about learning your people's myths, which I think is useful, but I also think that it's useful for people to know, things like Aesop's fables. It was a commonplace for children to be taught this sort of thing, folk tales, Jack and the Beanstalk, that sort of thing. As far as I can tell, that is completely disappeared now. And, fables and folk tales, Brothers Grimm and all that sort of thing, they were a distillation of traditional wisdom. But we don't need traditional wisdom anymore because, we have experts. And he talks about the studying your family's lines and family traditions, and how it is possible to, create new traditions where traditions have not existed in your family. I mean, families are so attenuated now, so atomized, that in many cases there are no family traditions, but that shouldn't stop men from starting their own. And yes, he talks on chapter 3, he talks about science. That he writes, do not love science, understand science, do not parrot the headlines. And he gives the example, for instance, of fat, saturated fat. That we were told for decades that this was wicked, 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 and it was substituted with substances which it turns out were far worse than saturated fat. Of course, now we find out that fat is actually good for you. He talks about studying. People should seek to study, to read every day, instead of, say, the modern alternative, I saw a documentary. Well, my own view is that documentaries are, best appreciated, or their best purpose is as a work of art, because if one is looking to learn information about the subject, a 60-minute or even a 120-minute documentary, there's not going to be much room for data there, for going into detail. And perhaps it's important, just as important or more important than the studying is the reflection on it. Oh, I read a book about such and such. Okay, did you think about it afterwards? Did you try to integrate what you have just learned into what you already knew, or into your worldview, if you like? That thinking is a good thing. But of course, now it's all about credentials. And Ryan Landry doesn't think much of credentials, particularly modern academic credentials, and of course he's absolutely right about that. That he compares the modern PhD holder. Let's see, is the modern humanities PhD is a monk in form, but not in spirit, because it's what are these degrees? They're consumer goods. They are they believed to have any intrinsic value? I certainly don't think so. He talks about the importance of learning mathematics, language, and history, that these have practical values, and the importance of noticing patterns, and also of, study needn't be a solitary activity, that it is useful and salutary to discuss what you are studying with others. In chapter 4, he talks. Also in chapter 3, he makes the point, which obviously has been made by others, but mostly been ignored, to turn off your television and put down your phone. Now, television viewing has declined in number of hours, but it is still shockingly high, something about 6 hours a day for most Americans. And it's obvious that people are not, from the very beginning, I suppose after the initial novelty wore off, people never watched television because it was particularly exciting. People didn't watch shows because they were particularly good. They watched them because they were on television. The television is kind of narcotic. That what does it do? It kills time. That's what it does. Now, obviously, the internet, smartphone, they're tremendous tools, but instead they're being used as a form of narcotic by people, and also as an excuse to get away with not having any personal contact at all. It's not perfectly acceptable when you're studying while pretending to listen to what that other person across the table is saying. I don't know why people put up with this, but that's what happens. In chapter 4, we eat now. We don't take food seriously, and again, food has become a kind of, because of additives, high fructose, appreciate food anymore. Food restaurants, they'll order their burger and fries meal with a large Coke, and it is consumed within 5 minutes. They don't want you hanging around the restaurant for a start, but that is a terrible way to. It's a terrible way to eat. It's not. It in no way leads to an appreciation of life. He writes in chapter 4. Forget what these men eat. Look at how they eat. They nibble on foreign food, detached from their culture's traditions. They eat quickly, forgetting to savor the meal as it might be their last. When working, they eat out of plastic dishes at their desks, heads lurching forward up and down as if a weight presses on their neck. Even in a park, they eat mouthfuls while glancing at their screens, unaware of their environment. These are men moving as if they are afraid of death visiting them at any moment, ignorant that this is always the case. We have a confusion here of form and function. That it's considered somehow sinful in some ways. Oh, I'm going to take an hour for lunch. Oh, you're going to take an hour for lunch. It takes you an hour to eat lunch? How is that possible? Oh, I don't know. I might want to enjoy my food. I might want to take a break from work. Well, that's obviously highly discouraged now because, I don't know, we're supposed to be, again, this hatred of reflection, meditating, perhaps. But, imagine going to a park. Oh, I'll eat my lunch in the park. And there you are, with trees and the grass, the flowers. You leave the office. He talks about the importance of handshakes. Now, I recall the second job I ever had, this was after grade 12, before I started university, I came across these pamphlets, which were for people entering the workforce, and it talked about the importance of the firm handshake, the firm, non-clammy handshake. Subsequent generations have not, and Landry explains that the limp, fishy handshake and the lack of eye contact, they make a very poor impression on people. How many fat, out of shape people that they are. Oh, it's January, it's the new year. I'm good anytime. Any points, pull-ups. You can do all sorts of exercises. I think that with a lot of people, joining a gym, or the prospect of joining a gym is a way for them to put off getting exercise. Oh, because, I'm going to have to pick a gym, and then I'm going to have to apply to the gym, and then I'm going to have to remember to pay for the gym, and then I'm going to have to, drive to the gym. And, that, one form of exercise, obviously, you can do if it's close enough. You can walk there instead of taking. He talks about training the mind and body for a purpose. Now, I'm not familiar with this show. He says, for polite society, conflict is avoided, agreeableness is the desired trait, no friction, no fighting. It starts from birth. Look at children's cartoons. Your grandfather watched Tom and Jerry or Bugs and Daffy attempt to kill one another for 10 minutes straight. You watch robots and monsters fight galactic battles. Your child watches Daniel Tiger overcome his anxiety about playing soccer. That is both sad and horrifying. I suppose my advice would be to keep your children away from this sort of thing. That children's literature was typically about people who were not like you, being placed into situations that tested their mettle. Treasure Island is a very good example of that. I'm sure that every boy who reads Treasure Island, and I certainly felt this way, asked, how would I react if I found myself on a ship with bloodthirsty pirates? Would I be as brave as the hero of Treasure Island? But children's literature and children's TV now is all about how would I say a gender liquid, young people with body image problems, and there's nothing aspirational about it. Childhood is the time when people should be aspirational because the whole world is in front of them. The older one gets, the fewer avenues there are left. There are all of these paths that diverge from your life when you're very young. And the older you get, there are fewer and fewer paths. So childhood is the time when one should be thinking about all that is unusual in the world. He writes, contemporary man cannot understand dying for a trait to which they assign no value. It's loss of honor. That honor is considered to be a risible thing now, but it is not risible. Civilizations in the past, until fairly recently, were based largely on the concept of honor. A man with no sense of honor is a man who will accept anything. He writes about honor and shame. That I don't know if it's in this chapter, but I think this is very important. He talks about the power of no. That we go along to get along. That we put up with things that we don't like or that we actually find intolerable, and we put up with them from bosses. I suppose we put up with them, from university professors. We put it up with this sort of thing in society when people say outrageous things and one is supposed to nod one's head. And we put up with it from women. And one of the things I've learned in my life, I learned it rather too late to be of that much use, but I'll pass it on to you, is resentment is the most corrosive acid that exists in social relationships. That you put up with it, 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 And as Landry explains in one of the chapters, it typically leads to a kind of explosion, a disproportionate reaction. Whereas, having said no previously would have prevented the buildup of the resentment. And with regard to women, I'll pass on this advice, which was, bitterly earned. One meets a woman, one's attracted to a woman, one is smitten with a woman, and this woman is not going to have, all of the qualities, say, or attributes that one would like, or all the habits. But a man will put up with it. And then after the first glow of the romance or the sexual attraction, it wanes. This becomes more and more irksome, and resentment builds. And often a man will lash out at a woman for saying the sort of things that she typically says, or doing the sort of things that she typically does. And the woman is quite rightfully taken aback. Oh, you're just mentioning this now? Why didn't you say something about it before? And the answer to that was, oh, I'm a coward. Or I thought you would leave me if I said these things. Or I didn't want to make trouble because everything seemed to be going along so well. So, my advice in this respect is make it clear to any woman right from the very beginning that there are certain things that you simply will not put up with, that this is, make or break. Now, obviously, you can't have too many of those things, and if too many of those things come up, you've obviously chosen the wrong woman. If they're relatively trivial, they can be ignored. But make your needs and demands known up front, because it makes things so much smoother later on. He talks in chapter 5 about, I suppose, the reluctance of fathers to get involved in the lives of their children, particularly their daughters. Again, this is a form of cowardice. I would say that also I suppose some parents feel, fathers in particular, feel that they will get in trouble, serious trouble from their wives, perhaps, or perhaps from the authorities if they lay down the law. And in some cases, this is true, but there's no getting away from it. If you allow children to act on their desires, bad things are going to happen. And, it's pretty much an iron law that a man who grows up in a household with a strong mother and a weaker absent father is typically not going to have a good life. That combination is highly correlated to not only homosexuality, but also to rape and serial killing. The obverse of that is that a woman, a girl who grows up with a very poor relationship with her mother, this is typically manifested in adulthood by extreme sexual promiscuity. He talks in chapter 6 about religion, and he writes, religion was made by men to honor the gods they thanked. Now, yes, and that soul, the idea of soul, of personal soul, is higher than materialism. Now, we tend to laugh at this now, but again, keep in mind, this has not been the experience of all of humanity until a couple of generations ago. So were all of these people wrong? Were all of these civilizations wrong? One could ask the question, what did they achieve compared to what we have achieved? Because if you look at the current situation, we seem to find ourselves in a position where, we're just kind of, when is the world going to end? Like 6 months from now or a year from now? I mean, it can't go on like this for much longer. And one of the major reasons for that is because men aren't acting like men anymore. And an observance of religion, at the very least, it shows humility. It shows that that there are forces more powerful than your own will or your own desires. And that one should rightfully be grateful for benefits in life. Ryan Lundy has great fun, what I guess you'd call New Age spirituality, which is typically, he doesn't use this phrase, but it's typically associated with whoring after false gods. And again, spirituality it's a consumable experience. It's a form of materialism. Now, let's see. The fear of death, the fear of aging and fear of death. Landry talks about this. Now, this is obvious. It's obvious to everyone, but everyone grows old and everyone dies. But we have ordered our societies now as if these things are not true, which leads to unfortunate consequences. It leads to women in their 50s and 60s carrying on as if they're in their 20s, like the cool wine aunt phenomenon or the wine mom. Oh, it's very funny that that a mother in her late 40s is telling everyone on social media how she likes to get drunk, and maybe show some video of her getting drunk. But of course, it leads to things like men dyeing their hair. And I noticed, when was this? This would have been about 15 years ago. It just hit me. I was walking the street, maybe went to a store, and I was looking at the heads of the men over the age of 40, and I wasn't seeing any gray hair. And then it hit me like the proverbial ton of bricks. Oh my God, they're all dyeing their hair. They all think that they're going to look young forever. And of course, as Muriel Sparks said, a life lived without the awareness of death is insipid. Because, I mean, what, you think you're going to get another 20 years, another 40 years, that you can make up for all those things that you failed in, and you can achieve all of those things that you didn't achieve? That's not how it works. Your life comes to an end. Everyone's life comes to an end. We don't know when it is, but every man will be judged in various ways after his death. And if one does not understand that, it makes it difficult to find any purpose in life. He writes about art, that he's in favor of art. It's the expression of the human condition. Seek out memorable art, train your eye, and I would add train your ear as well. Now, a lot of people think that art is stupid, fruitless. It's, for idiots, phonies, and homosexuals. But, if you've seen the cave paintings of Lascaux, you know that art is essential to our attempts to unify ourselves with the world. Let's see. Oh yeah, in chapter 8 he embraces the DIY aesthetic. Men used to know how to do a lot of things. Practically all men used to know how to do a lot of things, and now men don't. And I suppose we have been taught to consider that to be some sort of advantage, and clearly it's not. Just in terms of expense, if you're going to have to go to some sort of professional every time something breaks or isn't working properly, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. But this is kind of learned helplessness. If men knew how to fix broken shelves or to put up shelves, all of these things, how is it that they knew these things and you don't? You're supposed to be the smartest people on earth. How come you can't do these things which were commonplace? Of course, it used to be that men taught their boys, things like, changing the oil on the car, that sort of thing, woodworking things, metalworking things, all sorts of things. But again, modern manliness is associated with selfishness and atomization. And we congratulate ourselves for this, which is the one of the strangest thing. In chapter 9, he writes, aim to become a leader, a man worthy of emulation. Men who lack control are children. And that, toleration leads to resentment. That, of course, again, if you know about the new male grin, that we see these videos of men in their 30s or even 40s acting like they'd won the Powerball because they opened some package from Amazon, or some new video game arrives in the mail. This is not, again, this is, you tell a 4-year-old that he's going to get ice cream when he wasn't expecting an ice cream, you would get a reaction like this. But again, it shows that these people are incapable of true feeling, of true emotion. How would they act if something genuinely profound had happened in their lives? In chapter 10, Ryan Landry has a parable about a 40-year-old man who's married with children, and he meets a 40-year-old bachelor. And the bachelor tells him that he envies his life, and they leave it at that. And Ryan Landry considers that the married man has failed in his duty. Yes, he writes, both men failed in some regard. These small failures are why men are in this mess. The bachelor said he wanted what the family man had. He did not ask him how he did it. He did not seek advice. He simply wanted. Without any discussion, he could not be sure that he wanted it. The bachelor would not defer to the family man and be taught. He would not admit a failing in an area of improvement. And Landry makes this point in the subsequent chapter, that it is humility is a good thing, and that it is perfectly all right to admit that you are not capable of doing something or understanding something with help. That's what friends are for. That's what the community of brotherhood is for. We see these situations now. I suppose it's perhaps more commonplace with women than with men, that, oh yes, the biological clock is ticking down, and oh, I'm 39 years old, I better get married really quick and then have a baby. And the shocking change in this woman's life, between the life that she'd been living for 20 years or more, to a life which is extremely constrained. It might even seem like a prison for that. And where are they going to get advice about this? About the changes in their life, and how they feel that they don't have control over their lives, or once they believed that they had control over every aspect of their lives. I mean, there are sacrifices. When a man marries, he makes a sacrifice. I mean, if he's true to his marriage, he says, I'm not going to have other women. I'm just going to have you. I've decided on you. And if they have children, then of course I'm going to sacrifice materially to look after my children. Now, these are voluntary decisions, and they lead to more contented and productive lives. But let's not pretend that they aren't sacrifices, at least in terms of individualism. And of course, as Landry points out, individualism is the highest value of society today. In chapter 10, he goes into great detail about choosing a woman. And essentially his advice comes, I suppose, the men going their own way. It's not possible for me to find a wife because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. Well, one of them being all women are feminists. Well, as Landry points out, women are likely just parodying this. They believe in something, then you do not want to stand against that if you are a woman. For the rest of it, if you find yourself faced with these bad choices, find a different pool to seek women from. Because there's certain pools which are not going to, lead to, you're not going to find women in those particular dating pools. And, you should be looking, don't be a trained clown, But if you're constantly belittling your masculinity, going along to getting along with a woman, Here's something else I picked up in my life, which I told children, that if a woman does not respect her husband, the children will not respect the husband. In this disrespect does not have to be displayed openly, with insults, that sort of thing. Children are very receptive to cues. They live in a closed world, so they're much more receptive to clues than adults are. And children have the uncanny ability, for instance, children are at the beginning far closer to their mothers than to their fathers. They will ape this behavior. I've seen it again and again. I've seen it again and again where a decent or even a high standard of living for their wife and their children are regarded as absolute clowns by their children. It's the saddest thing in the world. So, as I say, don't let yourself be treated like that. The power of no. I mean, why would you marry a woman who doesn't respect you? It's one of the very worst decisions that you could make. And again, he writes about being honest about yourself, about your virtues and your flaws, and in terms of finding a suitable woman to be your wife. Well, you want to select a future mother, and there are ways that you can see how they act around children. There are various analogs of motherliness in their behavior. And I suppose one of the top ones would be kindness, reflexive kindness instead of reflexive cruelty. It may be very amusing to have a girlfriend or wife who is quick with the witty quips and the put downs, but that doesn't really point to being a loving mother. I suppose right up near the top, disregard what women say they want in a man. Again, this follows from the female consensus. Oh, they want a man that they can talk to. That's one of the things they say. We'll talk to about what? Do you want to marry a debating partner? I know that some men marry debating partners, but I don't think that women want to marry a debating partner. Oh, let's talk about politics, or let's advertise our disagreements about the latest HBO shows. These things aren't really important. Ryan Landry says that a woman wants a leader and a monster, and I would add that I think that it's very useful for men vis-a-vis women to have a certain mysterious quality, to not be totally understood, to not be played out. I mean, that's easier than it seems, because I will say that men make efforts to try to understand women. Women, with few exceptions, believe that men are just like women and think like women and will act like women under similar circumstances. That is very wide of the mark, but that's the way that they think. He advises against constantly showering women with gifts, because it indicates subservience. In chapter 11, he talks about being a father. You are your child's first model of a man. And this is really, really important. I mean, if you are, feckless, ineffectual, selfish, cold, distant, whatever, or constantly pretending to be, your children's pal instead of their father, how do you think that this child is going to turn out? Despite what people see on television, or what they see on the internet or whatever, pretty much right up until puberty, there's a very strong tendency for children to believe that their family is the model for all other families. That other families doing something differently, they're doing it wrong, because your family is the one that you know so closely, from the inside, as it were. And he talks about the importance of meals with one's children, which is very useful for all sorts of reasons. that you see how easily fathers and mothers have been shut out of this basic social ritual. Too busy, don't have time. Oh, don't have time? Apparently, you have time to spend, I don't know, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours a day on the internet or sending text messages back. No, you have plenty of time. And again, he talks about developing small traditions as a way to knit the family closer together, to to bring yourself into the life of your children. Now, I've noticed that for several decades now, fathers pretty much step out of the picture when their children reach puberty, or maybe 10 years old now, because it's, I don't know, it's kind of embarrassing, and also there's the pull of selfishness. Oh, it's not, we have experts for that. You know, he asks, do you know the name of your children's friends? Why don't you know the name of your children's friends? That, again, that your children are looking for leadership from you. They are not looking for cool parents. And I have never known a case personally of anyone who had a cool mom or cool dad who wasn't deathly embarrassed by it. Not just at the time, but often, you know, years or even decades later. You do not want to be a cool mom or a cool dad. Children will say that sort of thing if they, you know, if there's things that they want to get away with and they think that's the way of doing it. In chapter 12, Ryan Landry talks about hunting and guns. It's barbaric. They text you from their device made with materials collected by African child labor in mines while wearing shoes made in Asian sweatshops. Well, again, hunting and the possession of weapons has been common to men since the beginning of time. Are we so much cleverer than those people? You know, and not in this chapter, but self-defense. You know, who is most responsible for your self-defense? You are. If you believe that the law has any personal interest in your well-being, you are sorely mistaken. As Landry says, you know, the universe is indifferent, that injustices are meted out every single day by to avert catastrophe, then, you know, go to the courts, the criminal courts or the civil courts. Oh, yes, I was attacked. I was shot, whatever. Oh, but I got this settlement. Yeah, my legs don't work anymore, but I got this settlement, and apparently, you know, everyone knows that that person who attacked me is a bad person. You don't want to be in that situation. You simply don't. And the recourse to legalism is a sign of a defective civilization, and it is a sign of defective manhood. Now, Ryan Landry talks about duels. I'm not. I'm very much against duels, as the church taught. It is God's decision when we are taken, and we should not. We should not seek to take, you know, God's role in this. But you know, I understand the precept that it is better to work out these disputes personally than to have recourse to the courts. Chapter 13, he talks about the importance of speaking, you know, speaking to other people, speaking in public, and he gives some very specific and useful pointers on how to comport oneself while speaking. And that he writes that a skilled speaker will draw followers on whatever path he walks. In chapter 14, he uses this German phrase, the Männerbund, which is a group of men aligned with male instincts and drives. You know, friendship is not what it used to be. Again, because of this atomization, and also for the reason that apparently women don't like it when men spend time with other men. I can tell you my own experience. I've heard this from many women. They say that, oh, when you get together, you complain about us and say how, you know, we make you miserable. And I've tried to tell women, no, that's not how it works. We are not like you. Men get together for a good time, not a bad time. But as I say, women find it very difficult, in the most part, to understand that men are very different from them. That this Männerbund, it is it's a group of men, and they have various roles to play, and they learn about responsibilities, duties, and trust. That all men understand that they are born alone and without purpose. Men make their purpose. And when one has a functioning group of friends, this is, as they say, therapeutically, a support group, but it is more than that. There are all sorts of practical advantages to this, because this Münnerbund serves as a kind of it's a collectivity, a collective intelligence, a collective strength, and the atomization. Oh, there's me and there's my girlfriend, say, and it's not even a question of you two against the world. Increasingly, it's one man against the world, and we are not meant to do that. That he writes that, yeah, so this question of shared responsibility. In chapter 15, he talks about how women are drawn to men who take risks. That men or women may say, they want settled men, but we look at the choices that they make. Look at the meme, which is what, decades old, of chicks dig jerks. Well, they do dig jerks, perhaps not so much because they're jerks, although some women do solely for that reason, but they see men who stand out, men who are willing to take risks that other men are not willing to do, men who don't care as much what the rest of the world think about them, as we are supposed to now. Again, we see how men have become feminized, because women have this natural tendency towards consensus, often the very, constricting consensus, that is not the typical or the traditional way of men, but we have been bullied into this. In chapter 16, which I prefigured a few minutes ago, he talks about the yes men. So the yes man becomes invisible, and you do not want to be an invisible man. In chapter 17, he talks about, again, this idea of humility, that other men are there to help us. Sons, grandsons, friends. And he talks about the question of forgiveness, real forgiveness, not this phony forgiveness that we've grown used to, where people are saying sorry for everything. No one is sorry for everything, and someone who is constantly apologizing is either, a sociopath, or someone who simply who barely exists as a person. I mean, forgiveness and forgiving are very powerful things, but they have to be natural. He talks again about death in chapter 17, that the death of a man gives us the opportunity to take stock of the life that this man lived. And there are things that we might find admirable in a man's life, and there are things that we would find less than admirable. There are choices made, which will seem to be good choices that will seem to be bad choices, and typically, the death of a man, the funeral, wake, or gives us an opportunity to reflect on our own mortality, and how, when one looks at a dead man, we are looking at, the human process on Earth from start to finish. And this should be an opportunity for learning. It should be an opportunity for learning. And he points out again in chapter 17 that failure to act as men hurts women, because the weakness of men, the New Age man, this does not seem to have made women happy by any social index that one chooses. Women are simply not happy. And in chapter 18, he recognizes the potential that some people would see this book as merely a checklist, and it's not a checklist, and that the most important thing that a man does is act. And so I touched on things that Landry wrote in his book. I can tell you, I would think that any young man who is honest, and any young man who is not malicious would benefit greatly from reading this book. It's not a long book. It's 117 pages. It's about a 3-hour read, 2 to 3 hour read, and it's not a very expensive book. I believe it's $6 or $7. I can tell you that I wish that I had this book when I had been an adolescent, which I think is the highest praise that I could give to such a book. So those are my thoughts on Ryan Landry's Masculinity Amidst Madness. So I'll have a final go at the stream. I went a little long, about an hour, half an hour longer, but I wanted to give this slim book the fullest consideration. So let's see if there's anything in the chat. Matt Forney says you can buy Masculinity Amidst Madness at Amazon. Okay. Okay, I did some shrooms today. Okay. And I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Everything about my life started as a contradiction, and I really started to question if anything really existed. It says, Mr. I have Tourette's. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you begin to doubt reality. That's the most nightmarish thing that I can imagine, frankly. I don't know. Perhaps that's just me. When LSD became popular when I was a teenager, it was explained to me that this would expand my consciousness, and the very idea terrified me because as I saw it, and as I see it now, my consciousness is already dangerously expanded. Anyway, that is the show for today and for this week. I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific and at 7 p.m. Eastern. Next week on Theater Thursday, we're going to talking about John Boorman's dystopian adventure from 1974, Zardos. And on the book club, we are going to be discussing Russell Miller's outstanding biography of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology and its bare-faced Messiah. If you like the show or any part of it, I would greatly and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done previously. If you would like to support this show with a donation, which would be greatly appreciated at this time of great uncertainty, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can contribute to me directly via Interac at Kevin Grace at this time of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly hope that all in order to ease the burden. Thank you. Good night.